Hey everyone, welcome back to Blurred Box, our podcast where we discuss a variety of topics from our unique perspectives as online school students and time to time invite guests to take part in our discussions and share their views. I'm Chloe.
Hi, I'm Haven.
I am Sophie.
And today we have a special guest who will be taking part in our discussion for gender inequality and equality. So this is Dr. Washburn.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. As we mentioned in the past, we are a group of online students who attend Stanford Online University High School. And Dr. Washburn is one of our amazing instructors in the English department. So I guess before we get into anything else, Dr. Washburn, tell us a bit about yourself and I guess how you ended up at OHS.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Well, let's see. I've been in education for a long time. I've taught at community colleges and public school and in many different states. My first job out of college was teaching English in Japan. And now I'm at Stanford Online High School in the English division. And I'm really enjoying figuring out how to teach online.
Yeah, everyone else is right now too.
Yeah,
yes, apparently.
Yeah. So I guess about gender inequality, right? It affects everyone. It's with men, women. I guess with the modern times, we even extend that to transgender, non-binary, however you might choose to identify yourself. But there are stereotypes or what they call rules about how men, women, boys, and girls should be or conform to, and that starts all the way from your childhood, right? And then it follows you too, this kind of stigma that always goes until adulthood. So not everyone really experiences gender inequality in the same way, and I'm sure you all have experience of it. Here's a fun fact also: we're still all girls here on this podcast.
Yes.
And so exactly, so we definitely have, I'm sure every single one of you has experienced some form of it, whether it's mild or harsh, and that applies to you guys in our audience who's listening as well. And I can imagine for some it's worst. Obviously it's different for everyone, and sometimes it's just really different in terms of people who face more than just one type of discrimination. So what are you guys' initial first thoughts on that? Do you guys have any particular recalls of memory where something has either happened for you or something that you first recall from, I guess, that for you in your experience?
When it comes to gender inequality? Yeah. I think that for me, one of the first things that comes to mind, I have two things. First of which would be growing up, my first exposure to catcalling and street harassment, which is something that I had never really anticipated, when I was younger, but the first time I experienced it was when I was 13. And that's a baby age. And I was in New York City and I was really shocked at that time. But when I talked to my male friends about it, no one really seems to, I think, treat it as something that's a really important issue to talk about. I think they know that they shouldn't do it for the most part. But I think that made a huge impact on me when I was growing up, as it started happening more, too, as I started going into, cities more and there were more people around. It just makes you feel unsafe. And I think that's something that a lot, not to generalize, but I think that that's definitely a feeling that women tend to experience more. And that's definitely impacted how I, experience the world around me. So that's probably the first thing that comes to mind.
So I never really had anything blatant happen. That's a good thing that never happened. But it's just, I've always experienced microaggressions or just some inherent qualities that society has brought into our lives. It's just as a woman, you always think that you're always a little bit less than the man. It's quite sad that it's like that here. But I've never experienced anything blatant, and I think the reason why is because society thinks it's okay to act like this. We have not reached a point where equality is standard. So for me, it's just I've always just had microaggressions. I never had anything blatant, so I don't know what you guys think.
That doesn't make it less significant, though. I do want to point out. I'm glad that you've never, had any huge, indicators of inequality, but I think microaggressions definitely add up, especially when you think about how young children are when they're being exposed to it. Then the more they're being conditioned to think that way.
Right. And being a figure skater, I haven't experienced any sort of inequality myself personally, just because it's such a female-dominated sport. And of course, there are males, but even pay-wise, I haven't really heard anything about inequality in that terms. But definitely, I'm sure there are in other sports. Sophie can talk about this as well.
Yeah.
But with USA Soccer, Sophie can talk about that because she's involved in soccer. But what are your thoughts?
I played soccer. I've been playing soccer since I was 5, so it's been about 11 years. And, it's always dominated, especially in sports that are not heavily female-oriented, more like half-half in a way. It's always thought that males are always superior and they're better, and I think that translates into the pay gap. And for like in U.S. women's soccer compared to men's soccer, there is a pay gap, even though I find it quite ironic because honestly, the U.S. women's team has produced a lot more than the men's team, especially in terms of World Cups wins and all that stuff. But yeah, it just goes to show that it's still apparent, even though there's not really much cause for it.
Yeah, I think something interesting is that also I did some reading on this, and there are like some really interesting facts about how gender inequality affects all groups of society. And like for children, for example, right, starting all the way from, like Kaven said, like a baby age, or even in kindergarten, right, if you wanted to, you take it all the way over there. Gender stereotypes affects children's sense of self from a really young age, right? And everything we've been talking about for like soccer and I guess any kind of particular job or field that you want to apply it to, you can like apply. It's crazy how you can apply it in terms of like whether you want to class that as like feminine or masculine. So what we were talking about, like with soccer, right? It's a like the first instinctual kind of thing as a child, right? The first thing is like guys play soccer, girls go sit on the corner and go have a tea party kind of thing, right?
Yeah, or cheerleading.
Or cheerleading.
Cheerleading, that's what I thought.
And like even in the movies, it's also portrayed that way, right? I remember, this is you know that movie, it's like Cinderella Story or something like that. It's like there's the guy, the prince is like the soccer player, and then the girl is the one who's going,
woo, the cheerleader. Yeah, that happens a lot.
Right?
A lot in like TV shows, movies.
Mm-hmm. I think of it in terms of nurses and doctors, If a guy is a nurse, they're emasculated, or if a woman's a doctor, people assume she isn't,
Yeah, so for like teaching, for example, as well, right? When we grow up, also, I think there I don't know what it was like for you guys, but I think in general, like there's also like a feminine kind of thing that's associated with teaching. I don't know, Dr. Washburn, what is your take on that?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of research in this area for higher education in particular. So when I was a graduate student and then teaching at the university, there's sort of report after report that talks, for example, about student evaluations of professors and how the word brilliant is often used for male professors and nice is used for women professors. This is really, I think coming from a place of innocence, perhaps, or ignorance, but it's statistically significant. And it really does affect female faculty and how they are seen in the classroom. They're expected to be nice and helpful rather than seen as experts in their field. So that's definitely an issue. The other thing related to that is that female faculty and people of color are often expected to do more service than others. So organize an event,
right?
Work with a club, set up this festival, because they're male, colleagues are seen as the researchers. And so women and people of color often end up doing a lot more of those kinds of day-to-day activities. And that too affects their experience. And then another generation of students who see that imbalance in people who have the same position in the same department at the same university.
There's a really similar double standard that I've seen as a debater. because that's a sport where you see a lot, I had a partner who was a guy for many years, and we had very similar debating styles. So I feel confident saying we were very evenly matched debaters. But there were definitely times we'd walk into a round and saying that our speaking style tended to be aggressive. So our judges would praise, my partner, and they'd say he was really, going and getting it, and being really aggressive, and they loved how aggressive he was. And then they look at me and they're like, you've got to tone it down, and they would tell me along those lines, you have to be nicer, you have to be more friendly. And so I don't know if it's a good thing or if I should have, kind of kept sticking it to the man, but I did change that. And so when I started being friendlier and being nicer and kind of let him do all the takedowns, and I would just, try to be friendlier and try to like show more weaknesses in the case, then I started scoring better, because that was just the image of the female debater that a lot of the judges were more comfortable with. And it's a really similar experience that a lot of the other girls in the league have seen too. So it's disheartening to know that continues, through your professional career too. But I know that that's a common stereotype too. Just, girls having to smile more, be more friendly, just be more welcoming in general.
Yeah, I guess with the whole stigmatism with that, Pooja, with figure skating, for example, I think it's an interesting concept that it's performance based, right? I think so. You get points taken and judges judge you. You're not really in control of it, right? I guess coming from my perspective from tennis, or even with Sophie for soccer, we score our points and you don't have a judge kind of judging us. It's like you can win as ugly as you want. You're going to win your point. But for figure skating, you're judged based on someone else and you don't really have control on your points, I guess. What do you think, or like how do you have any experience in that particular aspect, that even though it's like a female kind of dominated sport, I think, what's your take on that particular concept?
Right. Figure skating is very much a subjective sport. As you said, it's not like running or soccer where if you score a goal or if you're the fastest person, you win. There's a lot of factors at play, especially because it is a sport more for the people who can actually afford it, because it's a pretty expensive sport as well. So typically you see, for instance, with Tonya Harding, she's a really well-known skater, but there is that event where between her and Nancy Kerrigan, where apparently she, caused Nancy Kerrigan. Yeah, she injured her. So things like that. I mean, she was not from the best family or best background. She wasn't the most well-to-do, and Nancy Kerrigan was. So some of those factors were at play as well. And I think you could see that with some people say that the judging could have been a little bit skewed more towards Nancy Kerrigan in some cases, just because she was more well-to-do. She fit that image of a beautiful, well-rounded skater who had like great lines, great aesthetics, whereas Tonya Harding was known for her jumps and her athletic ability more than just her artistry. And sometimes that affected her as well. But you could also see she was the first U.S. lady to land a triple axel. And that was a huge turning point. But then, of course, there are other factors that weren't in her favor, and that kind of affected her in the long run. So you still see that stigma, even in a female dominated sport, towards the more feminist ideal.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
I definitely think.
Well,
sorry, Chloe.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I don't figure skate, but I have noticed that, it's a stereotype that women put a lot of more effort into their appearance. And I think that an assumption that a lot of people make, or that a lot of men tend to make, is that we do this. I don't want to generalize on behalf of women, but for me, if I dress up or if I look better, I either do that for myself because I want to look good, or I do that because I feel I need to make, a good impression on whoever I'm seeing.
Right.
Or that, could be in terms of the debate tournament. Like, for instance, I go and I'm wearing like a pencil skirt and a nice shirt and a suit jacket, and my partner again shows up in jeans and, you know, a flannel, and we get the same same scores, because he's not expected to look well presented or to look good. But I think that's something that people tend to expect from women more, even subconsciously, is for us to be like first and foremost like attractive or to be pleasing to look at before they even are able to like get in a position to listen to us or to listen to what we have to say. Or at least that's been my experience. So I know that looking good isn't always, or, you know, like dressing up and stuff isn't always like a
Could that
a choice.
like stem from sort of like a societal norm that women are trying to compete for men's attention rather than the vice versa? I think it really stems from like our deep roots back then.
Which I've never really even seen a girl do.
I never, yeah.
I feel like I see that more in the movies than in reality too.
Yeah.
I see a lot
exactly.
more men posturing and peacocking and like, you know, around girls than girls do. But
I mean, I for me it's like equal. I think in that case, especially, I feel like I noticed it less because I was in a homeschool environment, community for most of my life. But like in soccer, I've noticed it a lot more than usual.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of... Sorry. Go ahead.
Dr. Washburn, for teaching, I guess, online, how do you feel about that? Or like, if, you know, comparing that to an in-person teaching environment as well, I'm sure there's like very different factors. I mean, like for both students and teaching faculty, I think, right?
Yeah, I think definitely. In some ways, I think the digital environment could actually help women, that you don't sort of have the full kind of embodied presence of you walking around the classroom. But it's hard to say. I mean, I will say, I know that over the course of my lifetime, I've been told enough times that I have a kind of natural scowl sometimes. I think that's my thinking voice or my serious face. But I don't know any male colleagues who've ever been told to smile at work. And I have been more than once, not at OHS, but at other institutions, by like students, by other faculty, by, you know, random people I've never met. And that small thing is just a reminder, like, well, I was thinking about something very seriously, so I don't actually need to smile when I'm doing that. So those kinds of sort of interactions stand out.
How have you started reacting to those? Like, do you just smile, or do you just say like, okay, thanks, or I don't know how to respond to those?
Yeah, I think ignoring it, if you can, it can be fine as long as you feel safe where you are. It is a reality that sometimes an appeasing smile, if you're worried about your safety, is something to take seriously. But I also think if it's someone I could talk to, I will say, look at that person over there. Why don't you go tell him to smile? or I will, there's an artist out of New York who had a campaign about a sort of version of catcalling, but about telling women to smile in public. And so she would do the sort of graffiti of unsmiling women around town and saying, don't tell me to smile. So I love that too. We should all have that in a card we can hand out or something to flash on our phone. Yeah. I'm thinking, don't tell me to smile.
That's really interesting. I think also associated with that is also like, I guess, when we're not obviously not there yet, we're still in high school, but when you get to that point, also it kind of affects salary difference, right? I think.
Yes.
At least from statistics show. I think you'd be able to elaborate more on that than I would.
Yes, I think it's really quite shocking how the statistics have not moved much. And so women tend to negotiate less for an opening salary bid, and so accept a lower bid than a male counterpart. That sets them behind, not just for that year, but 5 years down the road, and 10 years down the road, and 20 years down the road. Another example from higher education is that, for example, in some of the sciences, women have often been underrepresented among faculty. Actually, now biology has more women than men. And so the thought is, now women are doing great. They're more than 50% of biology professors. But the strange reality is that now nationally in the United States, salaries for biology professors have gone down.
Oh,
Wow.
Oh.
It's really not a case of like, once there are enough women, then we're all there. It's actually a kind of strange evaluation of a discipline that is more women than men.
No, yeah. You know what's really interesting to me is that actually when you point that out, then when you put it that way, the I think of it like at this what do you call this? The scales. Thank you. Obviously my English doesn't work. With the scales, right? When it's gone to like 70% of women in biology, then it goes to the men as if like there's the stigmatism. It looks a bit worse for like men. In that like general view, right? The way that we're talking about that's the stereotype becomes it's lesser of a man to go into biology then because it's a women dominated field, if you know what I mean.
Right. So if before it was great, for a man to be a biology teacher, as soon as it's women dominated, it's suddenly emasculating to be part of that field. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
I think.
And that like happens in other forms, like nurses or dancers or anything like that.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the ways that it definitely affects men too, and boys growing up too, equally being told that there are a lot of fields that they can't go into. I've also found that in even the places where the field tends to be women dominated, so for instance, Bujai I ride horses, so that's also typically a female dominated sport. And there's strong representation by women in the professional field, but you also see that a strong majority, not majority, but like a strong percentage of the professionals in that field are men. And the same for chefs, where obviously cooking is one of the most traditional stereotypical female roles to fill. And so that's considered, a feminine trait until you get to the highest levels of being a professional chef, Gordon Ramsay, and that's where you start seeing more men at the top of their field. And that isn't particularly because they're better at everything that they try, but in the fields that they enter, then they're already given, a leg up, even in fields where there are more women, because they've just been raised in a way that makes them, like you were saying, Dr. Washburn, like more willing and more comfortable and more likely to get raises, and to ask for them in the first place. And being given those opportunities. So it's striking to me that even in, those female fields, men still kind of rise to the top because they're still provided unequal opportunities to get there. For the most part. They also, I'm sure they also deserve to be there, but so do the women.
Yes.
One of the
that makes me think about
equal pay too. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Dr. Washburn.
Oh, I was just thinking about, since we have so many athletes here today, about coaching in sports, that there are certainly famous female coaches across many different forms of sports. But in terms of like male professional sports, it's almost unthinkable to have a woman on staff.
Right.
And yet professional sports on the women's side most often have a male coaching staff. So even that is seen as natural somehow for women to have a male coaching staff, and unnatural for men to listen to a woman in the NBA or the NFL.
I think, in my club, I don't think there's a single woman coach that coaches a boys team. I personally have a women's coach for my team, but I've never seen the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for me, being a tennis player, I've spent literally since more than a decade in that particular sports field, and I've only ever had one female coach.
Wow.
And that's really stark difference compared to, and also a lot of the academies that I've been to for training, right? So just to elaborate more on like that particular setting, these academies that you go to train, they're basically like a camp, a boot camp, if you want to put it that way. And you're basically in this environment where you are set up to do a lot of training. You spend a lot of time with these coaches, right, and a lot of other players, and they put you in different groups, and you just, you work on the particular things that you need to work on as an athlete if you want to succeed in, in competing. And all of the, whether it's like everywhere in the academy, I've always been surrounded by men and by men coaches. And I don't know how particularly that might affect me, or like even for Pooja, maybe you can elaborate on how it is, or like Sophie for you in the soccer field, but for tennis, all of my coaches have been men, and that extends all the way in the academy, all the way from whether it's the physio or whether it's like our mental coach. I don't know how to explain the mental coach, but it's like they help you map out when you get to that level, and strategizing for particularly how you want to play to win your matches against certain people, and you analyze a lot of stuff. Those are also men. It ranges all the way to our fitness coaches as well, and the assistant coaches, and then whether it's even the people who are organizing everything for tournaments, they're all men. They're like, everywhere on the academy, and it's annoying not to see enough women there. So I guess, Sophie, how is it for you?
It just kind of, it's not actually about me, but it really reminded me of a story I was reading about Mary Kane, who was the fastest girl in the world until she joined Nike. That kind of circulated a lot. And it showed how she was like at the top of her career. She was 16. She was considered the fastest girl in the world, had straight A's and everything. And then she joined Nike. And then everything deteriorated because her male coaches wanted her to get thinner because that's what they thought will get her faster. But that in turn made her worse and made her slower and made her like develop an eating disorder. And it's showing that sometimes it should not be like that, because like the male coach thought Mary Kane should be thinner, but in reality she shouldn't have, because that's just not how her body's built.
Yeah.
I thought that was just an interesting thing to bring up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another reason for all this might also be that I think people still have a very outdated notion of what, a woman's end goal is, that being a mother and raising a family and being a wife. So I think that a lot of companies make the decision that women don't need to progress as far in their career as men do, because there's like an earlier end point for them or stopping point. And I think that's also one of the reasons for, the pay gap is the raises and everything like that, simply not getting equal pay for equal work. But it's also that employers want to invest in men more because they expect women to run off and get pregnant and start a family and not be a professional anymore. Sure. And even if that is a choice that, the woman makes to do that or to raise a family, she shouldn't have to choose between a successful professional career and, a successful home life as well. So it's interesting that we still rely on women as like homemakers. I see a lot of the time if a father is left at home with their child or watches them for the weekend, people praise him for babysitting and they're like, oh, good for you. Like, you're doing normal parent things that your wife does 364 days
father
of the year.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that we still kind of rely on this idea of like women having children and therefore they don't need to work, Which also puts like single mothers at a huge disadvantage, even more so than they already are. But
right,
it's disappointing.
I don't know. Yeah. For like, I think what I don't know. This is like actually for at least in Australia, we have from statistics in Australia, 1 in every 2 mothers experience discrimination during pregnancy or on parental leave or when returning to work. I don't know how that stats might differ in the U.S., but Dr. Washburn, in the years that you've worked in your field, how often do you see that, or kind of like what do you see from that, or have you kind of like dealt with that ever as well?
Yeah, I think it's a common issue for a lot of women, especially if they want to be pregnant and have children in their 30s or later or earlier. That the weight of that childcare often falls on their shoulders, even if they have a partner who at the outset seems to be someone who believes in an egalitarian partnership. When it gets down to it, they're the ones who often do a lot more. And it can be a real strain if you're also working to do that. I think if parental leave is for both parents, it helps women if men take parental leave too, to just sort of reconfigure what it means to have a newborn at home or a small child, or, when um, a kid is sick from kindergarten, that you don't always have the mother who's working come in, that maybe you call the father too, and that person has to take a half day. So those are things that are hard to legislate, but I think they have a lot to do with the dynamics of relationships and things you can kind of see around the corner, but then a lot of things that in the moment you might not have expected to find yourself in. So I've definitely seen that.
I think that starts really early too. That idea of the girl is like very nurturing and kind, and that carries over into teenage and then adult relationships, where you're supposed to take care of
I see that. I think you see that more because like it's still ingrained in our society. So you see your mom doing all the work, and then your dad is going out and like getting money or like being the breadwinner, quote unquote. But so just really instilled at a young age. So it just brings it up in your adult life, and that's how you think life is.
I'm thinking of like really early on in like first or second grade, when the teachers go, can I get some like big strong boys to help me move these chairs over? And back then, like, something was bugging me about it. I couldn't tell what, but something was bugging me. I was like, I could move those if I wanted to. But already, it's putting the boys in the position of like, okay, we're strong, we're helping out, we're being really, manual and physical about this. That same responsibility wasn't really given to the girls. Or if it was.
You want to know, Do you want to know, like, a funny story is that, also traveling a lot. I don't know, Pooja, you might relate to this because like when you travel often, you carry a lot of big luggages, a lot of big suitcases, and people look like again, this hasn't been like told to my face, but I do travel with my mom, and naturally we have a lot of big luggages, and I've been traveling since like 10 years old, as a really young age, and when you're traveling across the world, you don't carry small luggages. They're big luggages. I've emphasized that enough. But it looks really weird for some reason how a 10-year-old scrawny little girl with a whole bunch of tennis rackets is carrying like 3 big, like 10-kilogram suitcases around and like pulling it off the rack, right? And I'm like heaving it off, and people are like, "Why? Where's the man?" Kind of like to pull it, or like even, and there's like a really weird thing because I've been doing this for so long and I've just been in control of kind of like my own kind of stuff in traveling or whatever it might be, or what if it's like heavy, I'm like, well, I completely disregard this kind of like masculinity of like the man has to carry the suitcase. This is a really small matter, but like it gets me like really into it. We have taxi drivers, right, who are men, and they're like, they're like, oh, I'll take it for you. But it looks really weird upon me when I'm like, well, I'm so used to this. I'm like, I grab the luggage from him. I'm like throwing it into the boot of the truck on my own. And he's like looking at me funny. I'm like 10 or 13. I'm like, what? It's my luggage. It's my luggage. It's my suitcase. And then he's like, okay, well.
And then it's like, anyway. So it's scaring taxi drivers everywhere. I do the same thing. I have this like compulsive need around guys to carry my own things, and they think it's weird, and it is weird. Like, it's a strange thing to get stubborn over, if we're like carrying bags or I'm holding something that a lot of the times is very heavy for me, and they would have an easier time carrying it, but I'm holding on to it because I'm like, no, like, this is for equal rights. And they're like, Haven, you're being stupid. Like, you're just being dumb right now. But I would keep carrying it. Like, no, I need to do this.
I can definitely relate to that.
Honestly, I'm kind of like, I'm proud of you for doing that, because I've, exploited my like femininity to like get people to carry things for me.
You just like started your campaign.
I've been
like,
playing
this suitcase is for gender equality.
So I've been playing soccer my whole life. So I have really strong legs, but I've done nothing on my arms. So yeah, I'm a little weak when it comes to that. So I'm like, do I really want to carry this? No.
Yeah.
So then
That's
I just get other people that can.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
I have like
to figure out when
sorry.
you want to like exploit gender inequality for stuff like that. Like you
yeah.
can't pick and choose what.
No, yeah. For another like field in life, on a comedy aspect, when I go to the gym, okay, this might be a bit unrelated to, but this also is like a pet peeve for me. When you go to the gym, right? In the general aspects of life, we're talking about like how women are meant to look, right? Can I just like note as well, the way that your physical traits kind of also come through in society? That's like another kind of like stereotype, or kind of like a thing that like women with bigger breasts, or like or a bigger behind or something, is supposed to be looked upon as like nicer or whatever. And like for men, if you have bigger muscles, right, you have like bigger biceps or whatever, right, that characterizes them as like more masculine, like you're the man, well done for you, good on you. So when I go to the gym, naturally I feel this very it's not like aggression, but like it's like, why when men go to the gym, right, this is probably me just ranting, they always like go straight to the dumbbells,
the arm,
and they go straight and they're like, oh, get my muscles and get my bicep. I'm like, why aren't you running? Go on the treadmill for once. Like, never all this muscle. Exactly. Right. It's like,
that's the only thing I do in the gym is just legs and running.
Right? So like the first
really
thing they go
important.
to is like they want to get the muscles, but like what leg muscles are you going to carry all that muscle
it's like
with?
strange sexualization of different things for
Yes.
men and women.
Right. So it's like such a small thing that expands into like a lot of different areas, right? So yeah, just in that particular aspect. Like they're walking around like the letter T, like you belong on Sesame Street.
It's like
T for
And also, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but with dress code in brick and mortar schools, you know, with short length, and even at my old brick and mortar school, they wouldn't allow you to wear ripped jeans. Like ripped jeans for girls was not allowed at all, which was very surprising to me, because like, why can't you show even like ripped jeans in your knees? Like I understand a huge rip or like super short shorts, but
and then like boys just wear shorts and just like they're fine.
It's
but
strange
when it comes
because
to women,
I've also found it strange when they have teachers, you know, they put the burden on teachers to hold them accountable to the dress code. And it's strange, like, do you really want a male teacher looking at their, you know, 14-year-old student and saying like, you're too sexualized right now, like you shouldn't be in this room? I think that's really really problematic.
Yeah, that was me. So like when I was applying for schools, my mom wanted me to apply to the school that had a dress code, and I really did not want to go to that, or like a uniform. But I didn't really want to go with it because I went to their open house and their skirts were like short, really short. And I was like, what are they trying to like instill here? And I get that you can wear leggings, you can do whatever you want, but I just feel like having that mentality where girls are supposed to be put in skirts, especially since there's a lot of like historical significance to women wearing dresses and women then turning into and wearing pants. I just find like, why are they trying to do that? And I was always wondering. So I never wanted to apply to those schools that had a uniform like that. I don't know if that was only me.
No, that definitely goes back to, you know, having specific roles for the genders, and those roles are like inadvertently supported or like perpetuated by also having specific clothes and, you know, a certain way you're supposed to look and stuff like that, because you're dividing people already into like two very distinct binary groups.
So like, even if it's just the clothes, it's just, I guess our main kind of point we're kind of making as well as like, is just that there's this specific kind of mold that our society has kind of decided to carve out and place as a cookie cutter or like a default for every single man or woman. And like, even now I guess now that we're more accepting, I would think, in this particular generation of like, however you might choose to identify, if it's like non-binary or transgender or whatever it may be, it gives us more of a broader scope in terms of like how we're trying to move away from that. And just also to preface that, my example of making fun of people going to the gym and like working on like your muscle or whatever, like applying to like not just men and women, but that's also kind of a society's outcome, right? And I'm not saying that's kind of like a bad thing, but it's just something you notice and like something to poke fun out of, if you know what I mean.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But like at least society is changing. That is a good thing. There's a lot more female empowerment, more movements regarding that, and I think that it's not changing fast enough.
I'm really excited.
But at least we can be positive that change is ensuing.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of male allies now come out. I think people are less afraid to identify with the gender equality movement, because I think people are realizing now that, you know, gender equality means gender equality. It doesn't mean women now want men to be subservient or something like that. Like we're creating this different hierarchy, but there's a lot more education surrounding this, you know, on how men should act, on how women should react. So I'm, you know, I'm looking forward to it.
There's like there's like that. I guess we did talk about like the kind of like toxic pressure on not just men and not just on women to conform to a certain way, but also on like men to be a real man, and that burdens men who actually extend further than that. And that's something I guess we have that in mind for a future episode to see how other boys, I guess, and our classmates, or perhaps even another instructor to that'll be interesting to see how how they feel about that, and see
because
how they,
you know
how they
there's
react.
also society standards on men,
Exactly.
so it'd be interesting to just see how they
it kind of goes both ways.
Thank you, Dr. Washburn.
Yes,
thank
for
you.
joining us today.
So I guess our full takeaway from this is that for you guys listening, keep in mind the benefits of gender equality. Everything we've touched over kind of relates into, you know, it prevents violence against like women and girls. I think as an underlying kind of thing, it's good for the economy too in different ways. And I guess at least in Australia, you guys might be able to elaborate for what it is in America, but in Australia, gender equality is a human right. Yeah. Australia has committed to equal rights for men and women through a convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. Through we have like the Equal Opportunity Act in 2020 and more. So anyway, that it's just to show that in society we're pushing that, I guess, now in modern times.
Equal Rights Amendment in the U.S. is getting pushed around state by state. Yeah. That has some controversy surrounding it, but that's you know,
for 40 years we've been working on that.
Slow and steady.
It's a slow progress. Yeah, I mean, it's
at
there.
least it's progress.
Give it another 60 years.
But it shouldn't. Hopefully, change is exponential.
Yes, hopefully
for sure.
Blurred box.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I guess thank you guys for your time. Well, keep in mind, suitcase for equal gender equality.
Yeah,
got it.
Equality.
Thank you so much, Dr. Washburn, for coming on today.
And thank you so much.
Yeah. So this was our. If you enjoyed our conversation today, be here for next week for another discussion, perhaps with on a male classmate coming in and more differing views. So this is the Bird Box podcast. We had Sophie, Haven, Pooja, and Dr. Washburn today. Thank you all for listening, and I'll be sure to see what we can do for next week. Well, anyway, so thank you guys for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Yay.